Hey there, my name's Sebastian, and welcome to Talk That Pod, podcast where I have conversations with some of the most interesting podcasters in the world. On today's show, I'm speaking with Arielle Nissenblatt, founder of almost too many things to mention. You've been running the EarBuds podcast collective, which is a podcast recommendation newsletter, for 9 years. You've got 2 other podcast newsletters, Podcast Suite Text About with Lauren Passell, as well as Podcast Plunge. And of course, you've got some of your own podcasts as well. Trailer Park, the podcast trailer podcast, where you review and analyze podcast trailers. And another show called Daily Tips that may or may not help, with your co-host, Ned Donovan. And you were also recently inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame with other notable podcast industry figures such as Dan Carlin and James Cridland. Arielle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And it's cool having your bio read to you in second person. You've done this, you've done this, you've done this. You don't get that very often. It's usually she does this, you know? So that was a unique experience. Starting off strong.
It's a lot of things, but that kind of leads me to my first question. Given that you run all the things that I just mentioned, I guess the first question is, how do you find the time for all that? What's your time management secret?
People think I have a time management secret. What I really have is the ability to kick into gear when I know that I have to. The same tactics that I used when I was growing up in elementary school, middle school, and high school, where the night before a project, that's when you get your creative inspiration. I do a little bit more than that nowadays, but still a lot of things come together in crunch time, and that's honestly when I'm most creative. So I do some scaffolding with a lot of the projects that I work on, a lot of the work that I do beyond the podcast that you mentioned and the newsletters that you mentioned. I work with clients on marketing their show, finding audiences, engaging those audiences. And a lot of the work that I do is research. So I spend a lot of time on the internet looking for similar shows that the hosts of the shows that I'm working on might be able to be a guest on or buy ads on or something like that. So I do a lot of work like that as the scaffolding. And then I usually spend a few nights, and always nights, it's always like 10 to 12. And that's when I send a whole bunch of emails and do a lot of the implementation work that I do.
Yeah.
The research stuff is an ongoing effort. And then the implementation is like, I have inspiration, go, go, go.
You're kind of like my wife. She does that thing too, where she gets really inspired late at night for some reason, and she just, crunches through a whole bunch of work.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious though, sort of looking at your career, can you maybe walk me through where you had sort of some turning points that made you kind of go, okay, this is more than a hobby. This is turning into a career. What did you do to sort of become this well-known figure in the podcast industry?
Great question. I never set out to be like a well-known figure in the podcast industry. I started in the podcast space as a listener, and I was just obsessed with listening and connecting with other listeners. And to this day, I still love coming across someone who's like, I love podcasts. I heard you work in podcasts. And I'm like, okay, tell me everything. What do you listen to? How did you discover that thing? Do you watch podcasts? All this kind of stuff. And I've been like that since I got started in the space, which was as a listener in 2014 and as a professional or an aspiring professional in 2016, 2017. So 2014, I had just graduated from university and I had studied geography, and I did not know what my career path was going to be, not because I studied geography. I feel I must say that there could have been a path for me within geography. I could have gone into GIS, Geographic Information Systems. I could have gone into more traditional like city planning, things like that. And I was interested in all of those things. But just out of college, it's hard to find entry-level jobs there. They're few and far between. And I didn't do internships in that area during college. So I hadn't built up the network. So I went into a series of jobs in the nonprofit space from 2014 to 2017. And while I was in those jobs, I was listening to podcasts and I was chatting with my colleagues about the podcast that we were all listening to. It was a time of boom in the podcast world. It was when Serial came out, and it was when a lot of narrative podcasts were being produced and being given a lot of runway to promote. So they were reaching a lot of ears. They were growing the podcast space in terms of listeners. And I definitely was one of those people that was hooked into it from that time. I was one of those people, though, that chose to take that hook and eventually make it into a career. I moved to Los Angeles in 2016 after my first job out of college, which was in Jackson, Mississippi. And I was in the car all the time, driving to nonprofit-related jobs. I was a communications coordinator. I was a marketing manager. I was a Hebrew school teacher. I did a lot of different things. I think at one point I had 7 part-time jobs.
Wow.
And it was fun. I honestly liked the hustle, and it made me more creative because I had to figure out how I was stringing it all together. And I got to listen to a lot of podcasts while I was driving from place to place. And the act of listening to podcasts got me thinking a lot about podcast discovery. And it also made me more creative because I was listening to podcasts about entrepreneurship and creativity, and also the geography around me, plugging into the communities that I was now a part of. And a few months into being in Los Angeles, decided that I wanted to do anything to have a career in this space. Didn't know what, because I didn't have any background in it. I was just a listener. And now I know that being quote unquote just a listener is really valuable because it puts you in a place that you know what other listeners look for, what they want. And that is really great when it comes to audience development and engagement. I was an engaged audience member, and I have realized over the years that I do a pretty good job putting myself in the shoes of other people, which allows me to work with a lot of creators who need to spend time in their craft and don't have the time to zoom out and put themselves into the shoes of their audience. I can do that for them. So 2014, started listening. 2016, started thinking about podcast curation and audience development. Didn't know these terms at the time. I was just kind of doing what I was doing. So that was a big inflection point for me, was must work in this space. Then I started EarBuds, you mentioned, in 2017, and was doing that for a while I was looking for full-time jobs. I didn't know what direction I wanted to go into in podcasting. I ended up managing a podcast studio at a co-working space for about a year and a half. And while I did that, I was continuing to meet with other creators, using the co-working space to host networking events that eventually led me to meet people who would hire me for various things. And eventually I started working at a podcast listening app called Castbox. I was there for about a year or so. Then I moved more into the creator space. I worked at Squadcast, a remote recording platform, for about 3 years. And then Squadcast was acquired by Descript. So then I worked at Descript, an editing platform, for a while. Now Descript is much more than an editing platform, but those are the years that I group into creator services. That's when I really learned about creators and what they need and what they're looking for and what pisses them off. So over the years, I've gotten a pretty broad sense of the creator space and the consumer space. And all throughout, I have been involved in all sides. I try to keep up with what people are listening to, how people are finding things, and also what people are making, both from chat shows and, buddy shows, all the way to deeply investigated true crime, journalistic efforts. So inflection points. I mean, we can get deeper into it, but that's that's sort of the overview.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very detailed. I appreciate that. I'm curious, going back to 2017 when you started EarBuds Podcast Collective, what sort of problem in discovery did you see that you didn't see anybody else addressing, and how do you feel that's kind of played out over time?
I started EarBuds because I found that I was listening to the same 5 episodes every week, 5 shows. And when one of those shows ended, I didn't know what to listen to, or I would try something out based on a keyword search that I was interested in. And I just got the sense that there was something better out there in that general topic area, but I just wasn't aware of it. So I figured that if I have my favorite shows, my friend from my first job out of college, who I know they listen to podcasts because we used to listen together, they probably have their 5 favorite shows. And network effect, their friends probably can talk about their 5 favorite shows. Some of those are going to overlap, but a lot of it is going to offer something new that I may or may not like that could be great for me and I could tell other people about. So I started the newsletter. The premise of it is that each week is curated by a different person who chooses a theme and then goes out and finds 5 episodes on that theme. And anyone can curate a list. It's not people that I select. It's people that submit a list through my submission form. And a lot of times people who make podcasts submit a list because creators can include one of their own episodes as part of that list. So I started it initially because I wanted to connect with straight up listeners. I wanted more people to listen to podcasts, and I wanted more people to listen to other people's favorite podcasts because I wanted to develop community and I wanted to have discussions around those podcasts. And it went in a different direction of that, but I still am hopeful that it will go in that direction. And this answers your question a bit about, how things have changed over the years. And I forget how you put it, but what were my expectations at the beginning versus what's the state now?
Yeah.
And what I realized, one of my biggest takeaways is I built for what I wanted and for what I tested and proved in a small group of people. I initially put out a poll, a long survey via SurveyMonkey, which I learned about on a podcast ad, and sent it to my friends who I know were podcast listeners. They sent it to their friends. I got about a couple hundred responses, and I'm sure that if I look back on that initial survey, it was not written in best practices when it comes to gathering data. But I learned that people are interested in listening to more podcasts, and I learned where people tend to listen to podcasts and how they tend to discover and how they might want to be involved in this newsletter. And that gave me an initial jumping off point that I ran with for a while. And then I realized that the quickest way to grow the newsletter was to be in touch with creators, because creators want their podcast to get found.
Mm-hmm.
That means sometimes that they are just interested in being subscribed to the newsletter for the time that they're being promoted. And I'm sure you understand this too with your newsletter. Yeah. So really what I would love to do is, it's hard to find pockets of people who gather in one place who just love listening to podcasts, because often they love listening to podcasts on specific themes. And similar to your newsletter, my newsletter features a different theme each week. Yours is not themed, but it's different episodes each week, not on a theme. And that means that if somebody comes to my newsletter because they saw a list about true crime, they're curious about true crime podcasts, the next week might be about interviews with Eastern European creators. And that is a very different thing. And I'm not exaggerating with how niche I can get with my newsletter. Mm-hmm. I've gotten a little bit pickier over the years with regards to which submissions I greenlight, but I still really do love the ability to say, yeah, let's have a list about this completely random thing, because there's value in presenting these podcast episodes to the world so that somebody might be able to find their next favorite thing. So I built something initially for one group, and it has expanded, and I've followed that expansion. It means sometimes that I do what I want because I want to, but sometimes it means building what other people are pushing me in the direction of. I just did a survey in celebration of, or alongside the 9th anniversary of my newsletter, and I learned a lot about what people want, and I need to analyze the data more. And I'm much better at survey writing nowadays, but that is going to tell me a lot. So I'll reveal that to you when it comes.
Okay. Yeah, and I've noticed also lately you've started to break out the newsletter into different niches and are sort of segmenting that way. How's that working for you so far?
Exactly. I have been thinking a lot about the principle that I just shared, that people come to a newsletter because it has a specific solve for a pain point that they have. And for me, I'm hoping to find people for the general EarBuds newsletter who are looking to find new podcast suggestions every week. And sometimes one theme is going to be perfect for them and they're going to love it and they're going to discover a new show or two new shows that they listen to. And sometimes they're just going to see the subject line and not be interested and move on and maybe not even open that week's issue. But they won't unsubscribe. They're just, they're happy to receive it, but not this time. And sometimes it means somebody sees an issue and they unsubscribe because it was enough. They had 3 issues in a row that were not interesting to them. And I realized, I do want the people who want to stick around. So I'm going to continue doing that newsletter as is, because I think there are people like me out there who are curious about what's out there in the world and want to see, sometimes it's new releases, sometimes it's shows that have stopped publishing long ago, but they're grouped on a theme. And I think that in and of itself is interesting to a big segment of the population. I'm just having trouble finding where those people are because they are everywhere naturally. So what I started doing is writing some spin-off newsletters on specific themes. So I've got a sports podcast recommendation newsletter. I've got one for kids/parents. I've got one for people interested in comedy, true crime, history, and fiction. And I'm considering a few more as I hear from people about what they're interested in. I feel like business might be the next one. And my goal with these is theoretically to run them all weekly, maybe. But as of now, it's been more when I have time, I put it out and I see what the feedback is. And there's no there's no breakaway winner for many of these so far. And part of the reason for that, I believe, is because I haven't done any marketing on it. I have barely even made an announcement. It's more of let me put this out into the world and see what naturally picks up. And maybe one day I'll put out a press release saying official launch of 10 spin-off newsletters from the EarBuds podcast collective Sonic Universe. And maybe that'll spur some real growth there. And maybe one of those, I don't know, I feel like there are a lot of business, technology, finance podcasts nowadays, and there seem to be a lot of people looking for them. And my goal also within this initiative is to feature podcasts, but also to zoom out a little bit and acknowledge that the word podcast means different things than it did a few years ago.
Right.
And so I'm also looking at media recommendations. So maybe YouTube channels, maybe even TikToks and shorts and other pieces of, quick bite information that relate to the theme. So when I really get the momentum and can really start working on this, I plan to really get into that and explore a little bit when it comes to the possibilities of what this could bring and the different segments that might be interested in the spin-off newsletters.
Yeah, I've been thinking about doing something similar with Find That Pod, but
we should collab.
I want to get paid for it.
Yes,
that's the big thing. And so I've been thinking, what's the best way to do this? Because when you think about all the various categories that you could ask in terms of, hey, what kind of podcasts do you want to get recommendations on, right? Well, sure, we can run down the list of the main categories, history, finance, arts, society, and culture. But there's a lot of sub-niches as well, right? And I feel like there's got to be a way to do it sort of programmatically where you kind of feed a database of podcasts you want to recommend in these various categories and then figure out how to segment those users, in something like Beehive, right? So, they'll only get, their sort of super niche recommendations if they give you whatever, $5 a month through Patreon or whatever.
Well, there have been a few people who have tried to do something like this over the years. The most recent one is there was a guy a few months ago. This was literally, I want to say last April. So it could be almost a year ago. I came across a founder, his name is Jack Joliet, who started something called Parla FM, parla.fm. If you go there, the website no longer exists. It was a very short-lived project, but I was excited by it, and I wanted to collaborate with him because it looked like a great landing page that was gaining traction and was saying, give us your email address and check a few boxes on what kinds of podcasts you're interested in receiving notifications for. And I think you and I could both do something like this, maybe building the infrastructure out of from scratch, but also what about our whole archive? What if you were able to segment, or not segment, but if you were able to comb through all of your past issues and say, here are issues yours are not themed, but there's definitely something that you could do there. And that means you have an archive for people who want to just check that out, and you could send them existing lists, maybe that have been repurposed, and then also going forward as well. So maybe there's a world there, and maybe we're brainstorming live now.
Yeah, maybe. And I think, you've got archives too, and we could probably leverage some bit of AI to help us sort of sift through all of that. So yeah, I think it's a worthwhile idea because I feel like, it's the old adage of, the riches are in the niches, right? The people, I think, will pay for very specific recommendations because I feel like, no matter what 5 podcasts I pick on any given week, there's always going to be a set of people that are like, none of these interest me, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that's natural and that's normal. And you're right. Sometimes they don't unsubscribe, but sometimes they do, right? So, I found out the size of my newsletter now, I'm fighting attrition a lot, right? Like I'm having to add a lot of new subscribers every month just to fight that attrition of people unsubscribing, right? But I think that's normal.
It is
so
normal.
I think there is something there for sure.
It's normal. And I've also recently come to be more comfortable with people unsubscribing and me saying good riddance. I used to say, fuck you. I used to be really pissed off. But now I'm like, okay, they don't get it. And sure, there's I'm not going to absolve myself of all responsibility. There's probably something I could have done in the nurturing process or some copy that I could have tweaked to be a little bit sharper so that they could understand what this is about. But the people that stick around, and I meet them in real life, and they tell me that they subscribe to my newsletter and that it helps them and that they're grateful for this work. And those are the people that I want. I want more of those people. If somebody subscribes because they saw an ad for the newsletter somewhere or because I spoke at a conference and that was, I talk about this a lot when it comes to podcast marketing. So I need to just follow a lot of the advice that I give to my clients, but apply it to my newsletter, apply it to my own stuff, which is the hardest thing to do. And I know you also come from marketing, and it's very hard to do for your own projects. So also, I think it's because I'm on the creative side of making my thing and because I'm on the marketing side where, that's what I'm solving for my clients. They're on the creative side and I'm the one who comes in and does the marketing. So I just need a me, but for my own newsletter. And it's difficult. It's difficult to do.
I hear you. Yeah. No, I hear you for sure. Now, speaking of online conferences, like you've been to a lot of podcasting conferences, you've spoken at them, you've done a lot of teaching at them, done a lot of sessions about marketing and community. I'm wondering, what's a moment from any of those spaces that sort of made you think, okay, this is changing how people are thinking about podcasts. This is changing how people think about podcast discovery. What have you had any of those sort of big moments where you felt like, okay, now people are hearing what I'm saying?
I love talking to people about podcast discovery, but over and over again, I hear podcast discovery is broken. And here's the thing. I'm not saying every great podcast gets found. There are a lot of podcasts out there that don't get their time of day and they stop publishing because they're not seeing the numbers that they hoped for. and they only had funding for one season. And if it didn't reach a certain number of, let's say, downloads, but I'll talk in a second about how I don't love downloads or engagement, they're going to stop, or the people funding them are going to pull the plug. But I also think there are a lot of people out there who make something and think it deserves an audience, and they haven't really done the work to figure out who that audience is. They just think they deserve an audience. They don't really know who they're speaking to. And then they call that a discovery problem or discoverability problem. And I think people use that interchangeably, as do I. And if we were to define them, we could probably figure out some ways to distinguish the two. But a lot of people say that people aren't finding my show. Well, first of all, have you made it findable? And then once you've made it findable, is it good enough that people want to stick around? How's your attrition? You could have a ton of people discovering the show because your cover art is great or because your trailer is great, and you've lured them in with this visual, sign that puts the name of your show in lights and it looks great and the tone seems to be something that I'm interested in as a listener. And then the trailer does a great job as well. I'm nurtured. But then when I go and listen to the first episode, you're not really speaking to me, or maybe you speak to me in the first episode and then in the second episode, you're speaking to somebody else entirely. Or it's obvious that you don't actually listen to podcasts and you're not a student of the craft in order to figure out how to continue to make something for this audience. So all this is to say, when I speak at conferences, a lot of people come up to me from the creator side and say, I have this really great show, but it's not doing that well. And I ask them about that, but I really can't get into too much because, of course, what can you do in like a hallway conversation at a conference? Ultimately, there are audiences, like we said, for niche topics, but you need to figure out who that niche is and what they want. And maybe are you a part of that niche, or are you speaking to them from a place of, I don't know, like an outsider's perspective, or which could be fine if you have some sort of relation to it. But it's about knowing what else they listen to and what other media they consume. How do you fit into that? How do you differ from that? And how do you make sure ultimately that you're offering them something that is unique enough that they want to check it out? So ultimately, I think when it comes to discovery, I don't know, new things like newsletters pop up all the time. Parla.fm type stuff pops up all the time and then stops because ultimately people realize that discovery is really, really hard to get right. And it's because of this that I described before, which is, do you deliver a really specific niche product that appeals to a niche audience, but you need to find that niche audience? Or do you, and this goes for both podcast newsletter writers, I'm talking to me right now, but I'm also talking to creators who should maybe be speaking to a niche audience. Or do you deliver something that is broad, that may have mass appeal, but also might have very low engagement rates?
Yeah, I think one of the big things a lot of podcasters and creators overall forget is just how big some of their niches can be. This is, these are global mediums where we're speaking to audiences that are all over the place, and something that may seem extremely niche maybe isn't. Maybe you still have a very large audience that you can tap into. But people, I feel like, get hung up on that a bit too, And
also, how do you find those people? You might not know
for sure the
pockets that they hang out in because it's so niche and they are hiding in different pockets.
But I think also for a long time, like a lot of the big podcasts, they got big in a time where finding those audiences was a little bit easier because you had some very hyper-specific targeting options in things like Facebook. You could very easily find people that were interested in only Harry Potter, right? You could target those audiences very easily. You can't do that anymore. Facebook's targeting has become more algorithmic and less sort of manual. So you just you don't even know sometimes how to target these audiences anymore because they're not readily available. I'm curious about sort of, again, your journey through the podcasting industry. Has there ever been a time where you seriously considered leaving and doing something else, or maybe felt like the industry was kind of leaving you?
I've never considered leaving, and I've never really felt burnt out. I have, and I've, to be honest, never really considered majorly pivoting my newsletter. I've thought about the possibilities of starting over, of what that would look like. But to me, it all comes back to the fact that I initially built this newsletter for myself. And I will keep making it because it still works for me. And if it works for other people, that's great. And like I said before, I'm happy to bend to a degree. I want to make what I want to make, but I also recognize that I want to reach people and make the people that I already have. I want to make them happy and continue to make them happy. But I'll continue making this newsletter, whether the subscribers go up or down. I actually think it's an opportunity if the subscribers go down, but they really stick around and they're more and more engaged. I can sell higher premium, higher dollar ads. I have thought about expanding, in general, when it comes to what I do in this world of, naturally there's an expansion of the word podcast. So nowadays I do talk about being a podcast strategist, but when speaking to a larger audience, I talk about being a content strategist. And I talk about video, I talk about newsletters, I talk about social, and I talk about podcasts, whether they're audio or video. There is still much value in audio only. There are still a lot of audiences that want audio when they're doing their dishes, when they're cleaning their houses, when they're walking, when they're driving, and they don't need video. And there are a lot of people on social media I see nowadays posting, "Since when do podcasts need video?" And those are the people that a lot of the creators that I work with want to reach. So have I considered leaving? No. Have I considered working for a company that I would be the podcast person or the content strategy person that is not in the podcast space? Yes, I've thought about that.
I think for me, a big one is when podcasters start, it often feels like they don't have like a sort of a pre-made strategy that they can look to or copy. They don't have something that is like a checklist, right? That gives them, especially on the marketing side, I feel like a lot of podcasters are very lost in the sense that they follow sort of the kind of, what ChatGPT will spit out at you if you ask it for a podcasting strategy, right? Like it's very generic, it's very bland, it doesn't stand out, it's not daring, it's boring, right. It's what I have.
It's also not tailored at all, and
not
the
tailored.
Truth is,
yeah,
you need to be doing something very specific to find your very specific ideal audience member. Yeah. And ChatGPT can guide you and maybe give you suggestions if you know the right questions to ask on where to look for that audience, but you need to know how to ask those questions and where to dig. So if you have no background in marketing, it can be really difficult to know what questions to ask. So I like that, the direction you're going in there. I guess one of the things I think about is a lot of people pitch me, and I know you get a lot of pitches as well. And I know you have on your website how to pitch me, right? And people still send a lot of garbage and a lot of feature me. How do I get featured? All that. And there's really nothing I can do to get people to, even though it's so obvious to me that at the top of every issue of my newsletter, I say, "Welcome. Thanks for reading. You're about to get a list from this person on this topic. Did you know that you can curate a list? Literally you, and you can include one of your own episodes." Still, I get people replying to that email saying, "Hey, how do I get my podcast featured? Is it possible for people to curate a list?" Yes, it's extremely possible. Did you read the first paragraph? So no matter what I do, and I get it. I am guilty of skimming as well and not reading something super obvious. But I really feel like if you look anywhere online that I talk, which is a lot of different places, you'll see that that basically my whole MO is community curation. I've got this podcast recommendation newsletter. My other industry newsletter is that literally I take press releases and I repurpose them for this audience. And then I also take comments left on prior issues of this newsletter and I put them in a community section in that newsletter. So that's my MO. I feel like I wear it loud and proud on my sleeve. I guess I need to wear it louder. And yeah,
Some people
that's
just
something
don't
that
read.
I think about. That and also like valuing that. So if you're going to get featured again and again, I started straight up asking people to join my Patreon, especially PR people who pitch me again and again. And what they're getting from me is they get to tell their clients that they were featured, that they got their clients featured in this newsletter, and that newsletter reaches however many thousands of people and gets however many more thousands of impressions every week. It might introduce that podcast to a bunch of people who are going to love them. And they're using the newsletter as part of their strategy when they are literally in potential sales calls with their clients. They're saying, here are the connections we have. Here's where we can get you featured. How do I then, I'm asking you this, but I'm also asking listeners of the show, how do I then get these PR folks, the people that pitch, even independent podcasters who maybe they have some budget, how do I get them to value my newsletter beyond just the time that they spend with my newsletter, right?
Yeah.
So I know we mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because like you, I get a lot of PR pitches, and to be honest, I get annoyed by the majority of them because they're extremely boilerplate. And I feel like it's like minimum effort. Doesn't take a lot of effort to blast a list of people, right?
Yeah.
The ones that really do catch my attention are the ones that are more personalized. But at the end of the day, it still matters if the podcast seems interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like that's such a big thing. But yeah, I don't know. I do get annoyed with the deluge of sort of boilerplate PR that comes my way.
And with no ask. That's really my problem.
Yeah.
It's, here's this thing. And then the ask is like, feature me. Why?
Right,
well, why? And
Why?
also, it's okay to offer something. We'd be happy to shout it out to shout out your newsletter, to share it within our newsroom. I started replying to people saying like, hey, happy to feature this, especially if it's a podcast from the BBC or NPR or another outfit that makes stuff and has an audience. I started to say, can you help me in getting the rest of your newsroom subscribed to this newsletter? Or would you be willing to share it out on the company Slack when it's live? And if I had 10 of me, I would do this all the time. And I would create a badge that they could put on their email signatures saying like, our podcast is EarBuds recommended. But it's a lot of different things.
Yeah, no question. And I think you're right. The reciprocity there goes a long way, right? I mean, this is just a very basic ask, and I think it's such a foundational thing. But it's just easier to blast out an email, right?
Totally.
Without a lot of thought.
And I get it. And I'm sure I've been guilty of it. But in the work that I do with podcasters or other digital storytellers trying to get their projects out there, I try to send, whenever I pitch you, what do I say? I say, I have a show that I think might fit within your newsletter's ecosystem. Is the best way to pitch still this, right? I usually ask you something like that because you never know if it's changed. And I think that in and of itself, when people do that to me, I'm very happy about that. I like when people acknowledge that maybe something has changed. Maybe there's a new link that I'm not aware of. So,
no, I hear you. Let's talk about indie podcasting a little bit. So I feel like I'm curious what your take is on the current state of independent podcasting, because it's gone through a lot of changes, especially in recent years, like a lot of consolidation, budgets. Where do you see independent podcasting right now in 2026?
It means so much, independent podcasting, right? It could be somebody who has an idea and then they put it out there and they say they're a podcaster and then they discover this label that they can call themselves an indie podcast. And that gives them, they feel good about that because it gives them a label. It's like, it's a legitimizer almost. And then there's people that have full-scale productions that have Patreon subscribers, that have subscriptions on Apple Podcasts they don't owe any of that subscriber money to a larger network that they're a part of, or they don't have any obligations to cross-promote within a network. They're independent. But I also just said the word network, and network means different things to different people. I think what I'm getting at here is these labels probably need to be defined, but at this point are not really defined. And what I talk about when I talk about independent podcasting is different than what somebody else might be talking about. I work with a lot of people who have a lot of downloads and are not currently part of a network, but might be in a distribution partnership with a hosting provider that also maybe sells their ads. And yet they're still independent because that distribution partnership has no bearing on the editorial. So there's a lot of different things going on here. To address your question about money, I've definitely heard stories. I heard one not stories, but I've heard situations where just earlier this week, I wanted to send a note to a friend of mine who just launched just shared a big initiative on social media. It's a big, it's a new media company that is looking for new shows to represent, to have under their label. But they're only looking for shows that have video components and that are always on, right? So a lot of independent creators who don't have video components, or who have video components, but they're not getting the numbers that this media company wants,
Sure,
are not even eligible for a conversation, which is fine. And they're not owed a conversation, and they understand that, right? The person that I relayed this information to was like, that's what I figured. And that's fine. But I just share this as an example of where things are now. But this has kind of always been the case in one way or another. It used to be, okay, the download numbers or the engagement numbers aren't where we want them to be. Maybe the video part was not really a big thing in this conversation, but ultimately, for a long time, there's been a threshold that you need to reach in order to be part of this larger entity.
You're obviously in the weeds, seeing a lot of podcasts on a regular basis, whether it's through pitches. What trends are you seeing in terms of indies, in terms of the formats or niches or tones or what are you seeing that kind of feels new or promising that we haven't really seen in podcasting before?
I'm pushing a lot of people who want to make. I mentioned I do content strategy, and a lot of times that includes implementation. But when I'm lucky, I get to work with a show that is either launching for the first time or is between seasons, and I get to have a say in the makeup of the show, the infrastructure, sometimes even the creative and the guests and everything like that. And that's the best, because there are things that you can do early on that set up your podcast for marketing success. I just put an article out about this, content tweaks that you can make that will help, that will go a long way in the marketing of your show. And what I've been pushing a lot of people to do is interview shows we've heard them before. Do your thing.
How dare you? How dare you?
But you've got to have something niche within it, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be some differentiator. And that can look like a lot of different things. But figuring out what that one thing is really important. So having a special question at the end of each episode that you can then clip for social media, or that you can use as your hook at the beginning of the episode. And then you get to it at the end of the episode and it's like, okay, we started with this, that was the exposition, or like we presented the end of the story, and now we're going back to how we got to the end of the story. Giving them something is great. Another thing to do here is maybe you record an interview like this, but you cut your voice out of it and you make it more of a narrative. And then you pop in every once in a while to fill in the gaps.
Right.
Or to, I was just on a show called Mike's to Millions. The host is Sam Brake-Gia.
I've heard of it.
I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. And what he did that I really liked is he interviewed me and then cut himself out and then put himself back in a way that made a lot of sense and kept the story going and connected all the tissue. That's a unique way to keep listeners hooked. So finding something that differentiates the show is absolutely something that I've been pushing lately, and something that creators are coming to on their own, because hopefully they are also consumers of video interviews, of podcast interviews, of whatever, and they're understanding that not everyone is a great interviewer, and that is okay, because you can edit your tape. And as long as you edit your tape in a way that is ethical and it makes it so that your guest is shown in the best light, that's all within your purview.
Mm-hmm. You talked about video a little bit earlier, but I'm curious how you feel about where things are at right now, especially with the sort of short clip platforms like TikTok and YouTube Shorts. What does that mean for podcasters looking to get more listeners?
The only thing that pisses me off about it is I'm afraid that there are some people who would otherwise have a nice, long, fruitful season of their show, 10 episodes long, 20 episodes long, whatever. But now all of a sudden they think they need to spend a good chunk of their budget going full out on video.
Right.
That's the only thing that pisses me off. Go video if you want to go video. Go video if you've proven, or somebody's proven to you, that you've got the money to make it happen and that it will reach your audience, and that audience is also on video. But don't go video just for the sake of going video because some ChatGPT told you that the only way to make a podcast in 2026 is to go video. It's just not the case.
Right.
There are a lot of people, and I'm always surprised by this, because I was resigned a few months ago to the idea that nobody's discovering podcast audio only anymore. But of course they are. Of course people like to not use their eyes while they're doing stuff. And look, even if you're glancing at the phone, I think you're still listening.
Yeah.
So I get worked up about it because I get worked up in general when there's advice out there that is meant for a general audience that people take literally for themselves. And I also think it's irresponsible on the part of the people that give that advice. I think you need to be able to give nuances. And I just wish more people said, this advice works for me. It won't work for everyone. You need to do inventory of your own capability, your own capacity, what your audience actually wants, what a lookalike audience actually wants if you don't know what your existing audience or your hopeful audience wants. And you need to use all of that to make your own decisions. I, as this random internet voice, can only tell you so much. But I don't think that's a lot of words, right? So it's not very SEO friendly. It's not the blogs that are going to go viral. So...
Yeah, I generally agree with you. To me, the video component has always felt additive. I mean, there is definitely the component where YouTube, it has sort of built-in algorithmic discovery, right?
Yeah, that's a different story to me, though.
Absolutely, but you're right. The modality in which people listen to podcasts, it's all over the place. It shifts. It could be while you're driving, could be while you're doing laundry, it could be while you're sitting at work. There's so many different ways people can consume this content. There's no rule that says there has to be a video component. And you're right. I think it gets in the way because people overthink it. People now are thinking, well, God, now I need a camera. Now I need lighting. Now I really
didn't want to be on camera, and now I have to be. First of all, you might not like what you look like on camera, and I might not I might not like it either.
Sure.
People forget about that. Not everybody is camera ready all the time, and that's okay. And not
Yeah.
everybody is dynamic on camera. It's a whole different game. And if you want to play that game, you should play that game. But if you want to make audio, you can also make audio forward or audio first productions.
Yeah.
And you can try both. You can try clips as a discovery mechanism, like you said before, algorithmic advantages to posting on YouTube Shorts and clips on social media in general. That does not mean that you have to pay a video editor and also be in a studio full time. That's very expensive. This is different, though, than people who set out to make a video series and then also maybe distribute that video series as an audio feed as well. So what I'm saying is like people should be free to find whatever excites them by searching whatever search bar in whatever platform they want to, being exposed to something, being excited by it, becoming a fan of that thing. I'm not against video podcasts. I think it's a ridiculous notion to be against video podcasts. A few years ago, I was like, ugh, the term video podcast is even weird to me. But now I'm like, okay, that's what consumers say. And therefore, that's what it is.
Yeah. It's a
the
thing
customer
now.
is always right.
Yeah, it's a thing. We have to kind of deal with it as an industry, right?
And also, like, as consumers, we deal with it, right? Like, you watch TV.
Yeah.
So that it's competing for our time in a lot of different ways.
For sure. Well, now you see
sort of media.
Now you see podcasts on Netflix, right? Which it's so funny. I've seen so many reactions online of people going, "What the hell are podcasts doing on Netflix?"
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't comport
Because they're
with
talk
their
shows.
view.
That's what they're doing on Netflix.
Yeah, but it doesn't comport with their view of Netflix. It's for TV shows and movies.
Right.
It's not for podcasts.
Right, but then what they really want you to do is treat it like a podcast app. So you hit the play button and you put it in your pocket. And maybe if they say something or they're laughing really hard, you take it out of your pocket and you look at it. But
sure.
There was just a headline recently, and I'll share it with you so you can put it in the show notes if you're interested. Somebody at Netflix said, we're finding that a lot of people are spending a lot more time on podcasts on the app. And that makes a lot of sense because they are using it on the mobile app because they take it on the go.
Right. Yeah. There's one thing you could change sort of structurally about the way the entire podcast ecosystem works. I guess to sort of make life easier for podcasters, whether it's, distribution, discovery, monetization, something else, what would it be?
It's still pretty clunky to launch a show in the first place. You need to know that you need to have a hosting provider. Fine. I think, that's one of the first things that pops up when you say, how do I start a podcast on Google? But it is not intuitive that you then need to submit that to Apple and then separately to Spotify. And then even though it's going to auto-populate on podcast listening apps or technically be available there, it still behooves you to go to the iHeart website and input your RSS feed there. Same on Listen Notes, same on Pocket Cast, same on all of these different places. So I guess that's something that I would like to see. It doesn't necessarily need to be streamlined, but it does need to be obvious when it comes to how creators can, optimize their show to be on as many places as possible. So that's on the creator side. I guess I wish that was easier for people just getting started. I also wish there were more opportunities for creators and maybe independent creators, but also all creators to seek and reap the benefits of editorial placement in podcast apps. I wish it was a little bit more of a rotating system. There are forms that you can submit your show to be featured on Apple and Spotify. It does not mean that you're going to get featured there. But there's probably a lot more within Spotify that's being left on the table when it comes to algorithmic recommendations that I wish was available. Apple, they do have a system where if you click on a podcast and then scroll to the bottom, it'll say people that listen to this show also listen to these. But there could be something encoded there that allows for every once in a while an independent show or one that doesn't have as many people following it every day to pop up. And the reason I say that is because that's how a lot of the recommendations work. It's not ratings and reviews like a lot of people are still spouting. Leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us in the algorithm. It does not. What helps you in the algorithm is a lot of follows on your show in a short period of time. So that's why if you scroll to the bottom and you'll see other shows that people who listen to this show listen to, you'll see the big shows. But every once in a while, wouldn't it be cool if it was democratized a bit and allowed for a show with similar keywords or a tonal similarity to pop up there as well? Coding wise,
Yeah.
I'm not the person to figure that out.
No, for sure. I agree. There seems to be a lot of gatekeeping that happens in that sense. And as a result, you wind up with seeing the same shows over and over and over again in a lot of the editorial choices. And I feel like that process is very opaque as well. Sure, there's some forms you can fill out, but then what, right? Like it's sort of this kind of fire away and pray that somebody notices your show. So yeah,
And
I do.
Go ahead.
No, I agree. I wish that there was a little bit more sort of this effort to feature independent shows that, maybe they're just getting going. Maybe they're seeing a bit of listenership, but boy, would they grow if they were just exposed on one of these platforms.
That's the way that they grow. That's the way that they grow. Newsletters help, but they're just one of the touch points. So are apps.
Yep.
Apps are one of the touch points, but ultimately somebody needs to be exposed a number of times to a thing in order to decide if it's for them. And then within that, after you get to that point, your show just needs to be good enough that people are going to want to stick around. And then hopefully you get to the point where it's so good that you've kicked off the word of mouth engine. I do think about when Apple eventually gets into the video side of things, which they announced recently, how that is going to impact people pitching their shows. So right now, Spotify really, I was going to say seems to be, but I know they are favoring for editorial placement shows that also have a video component or that have a video component first and then also happen to have an RSS feed or whatever. I worry that Apple's going to do that as well, unless there is a concerted effort to make that not be the case, which again is going to incentivize people to make shitty video.
Yeah. It is kind of a perverse incentive, right? Because it sort of forces people to do stuff that they maybe otherwise aren't comfortable doing. I'm wondering how you see AI and sort of more specifically generative AI and how that is impacting podcasting.
I hope it's not writing people deep sigh.
That's a big sigh.
Yeah. I hope it's not writing people's entire scripts. I'm okay with it giving suggestions for an outline, but you do need to then pop in as a human and figure out how to use that outline to speak to the humans that are listening to you. I really hope that voices, if they are being used at all, there's a disclaimer. I hope they're only being used to fill in when a letter needs to be read out loud and they don't have the voice of the person in a historic context, so they use a synthetic voice. I really hope that companies that are putting out thousands and thousands of episodes on a mass scale because they can make a few dollars because they can put them out on a mass scale, I hope that those companies don't do that. I don't know. I don't want to be so definitive about this because I also want to leave it open to where things will be in a few years and how things might change. But I do know that when it comes to drawing a line in the sand for human consumption, I hope we're always consuming things that are made by humans, at least most of the way. Like I said, maybe there's generative AI helping you with the infrastructure. Maybe it's helping you do research that you would not have access to otherwise. But hopefully you're fact checking and making sure that those things are real. And you're giving credit to those sources that are real. And I even if, and a lot of people said a few months ago when the news about Inception Point AI came out that they were putting out thousands and thousands of episodes every day. And even though they had only a few listeners, they were able to make money on ads because they were putting out so many episodes. Everybody responded to that saying, oh, okay, but at least they sound like shit. And so no one's actually going to listen. You know what? One day they're not going to sound like shit. But I still think we need to push back against that because I really think we lose a lot of empathy when we're not listening to real humans.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond empathy, too. I think there's a question of accuracy as well. I just did an interview with Howard Dory, who does the Plotting Through the President's podcast.
I love that show.
He's a historian, and he told me the story about how he's got a big following on Facebook, and one day he posted a show, and a whole bunch of people started commenting saying, oh, I forget which president it was. I think maybe it was Jefferson or Washington. A whole bunch of people came in and they were like, Washington never said that. That's a fake quote. And he's like, oh, how do you know it's a fake quote? Oh, well, ChatGPT told me it was a fake quote. And this is a historian who got this quote from literally going to the National Archives and pulling that quote out. And so you have, I don't know, you've probably seen on Twitter/X, when anybody posts anything, even remotely controversial these days, what are the first few replies? At Grok, is this true?
Yeah.
And I feel like people they're offloading their brains to AI to tell them what's true.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just one example, that story that I just shared with you, where you can't trust it yet. It's not quite there yet, right? And so when
you need to know how to question it. And that's my fear in the long run is it can be additive, right? It can teach people a lot of different things. It can help you plan. It can give people access to tools that they wouldn't have otherwise. I was just talking about this yesterday, that people can build websites in a day now, and that's going to mean a lot of junk. It's going to mean a lot of slop, but it's also going to mean one really great website that changes the world. Who knows? So that's good, right? That's good. And the same applies for podcasts. It's going to be a lot of junk out there, but it's going to be one really great, I don't know, argument made that changes somebody's mind. It's going to help.
Yeah.
It's going to help somebody make that argument. And that's great. But while we get there, we are training people slowly, and I'm noticing this among friends and the way that I use it myself. Sometimes it's easier to say, how would you structure this newsletter to be more SEO friendly? And that makes my life easier, right? How can I optimize the headlines?
Yeah.
But also, like, a few years ago I would have done that research, and maybe that's a waste of time. Who knows? But yeah, you're right about the offloading.
Okay, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit more about podcast marketing, because you're obviously the master, and we all need to learn from you. For podcasters that are just getting going, who kind of feel allergic to marketing, what's kind of the mindset shift that you'd want to install in their brain when it comes to, okay, you have to kind of get over that hump. You have to kind of get over that, I guess, bashfulness towards, self-promotion.
The first thing I would say is you need to learn the act of putting yourself in the shoes of your listeners, or of people who are scrolling social media who you would like to be your listeners or your consumers if you have a video component. And that means not freaking out when you post something on social media and it doesn't get any likes or comments, or even if it does get a ton of likes and comments, why is it not converting to people going to the show and listening and becoming my forever fan? Why is that not happening? Because has that ever happened with you as a creator, as a consumer, right? Do you ever go on social media and see the perfect post at the perfect time and change everything that you're doing to then go listen to that show and become a forever fan? No, it takes a while, and it's not trackable.
Right.
And maybe there are tools being created that help make it more trackable, but ultimately it's about realizing that this is a long game. And I kind of joked recently about putting a turtle in my bio to show people that I'm all about the long game.
Mm-hmm.
Slow growth.
Yeah, it's not a fast medium in terms of growth, that's for sure. I've heard you speak also about borrowing existing audiences instead of trying to convert non-listeners from scratch. What are sort of a few concrete ways that a show can do that?
Guesting is the number one, as long as you're a great guest. You need to know how to... There's like media training that I think everybody should do. You can't just go onto a show and think that being on that show once is going to get people to listen to your show, because depends what the interview's about. Right now, if people were to listen to this, they might be curious to follow me on social, but they're not going to go check out my show Daily Tips that may or may not help you, because we weren't talking about that. Maybe it'll have a trickle-down effect and people will be exposed to it. And okay, one of the episode titles was intriguing to someone, so they'll go listen to it. But I'm not here to promote, first of all, anything. Second of all, any of my podcasts specifically. And I think people need to make a concerted effort to guest on shows, but expect nothing of it. Same goes for like any sort of cross-promotional things. Like it's great to get your existing high-quality episode, maybe it's a feed drop, maybe it's a promo, featured on another show, because the people that listen to that show are complementary in terms of audience makeup to your show. But it could just be one of the touch points that eventually convinces somebody to go check it out. And within that, the copy needs to be pretty tight. What's your very specific call to action? What are you doing? What hook are you leaving them on? Or what's the word? Yeah, what hook are you leaving them on that they need to go to your show to learn about what it is that you just teased for them? So borrowing audience is great, but again, it's the turtle emoji.
Yeah. If you have a show, for example, that's plateaued at, say, I don't know, a few hundred downloads an episode, what would you say is kind of the diagnostic checklist that you would walk a client through to say, okay, have you looked at these things?
For the first thing I say is, what are you currently doing to market the show? And they might say, I post on social, I make clips, blah, blah, blah. But I know a lot of people that post on social the same exact thing every time they put a new episode out. And it's often, new episode out now. I talked to this person about this thing. That doesn't tell me much. Start it differently. Maybe at the top of your post, you put the quote from somebody, and maybe it's a controversial quote. And then you say, this was in conversation with a recent guest I had on my show, comma, name of show. Maybe don't link every single time you post on social media, because ultimately people are probably not going to click it at that moment anyway. But if it is a touch point for them and it's a high value post that gets them interested, that makes them question something, they're going to naturally look for more things that you do, eventually click on your stuff, and it'll come to them. A lot of people think it's a missed opportunity to not put the link. I think the link is important, and maybe you go and drop it a few days later in the comments, but try some posts that you are literally just giving value. You're not asking anything of them. Same goes with guesting, like I said. Are you guesting on shows? If not, what's your strategy to guest on shows? But let's back up and even just look at the content of the show. Is it airtight? Is it great? Is it speaking to who you want to be speaking to? Does it sound good? Is your intro too long? Is your outro too long? Is it too repetitive? Are you introducing the value of the show quickly? Are you introducing the value of the episode quickly? All of these things need to be audited, and I usually recommend that you get a neutral third party to listen to your show and give you some suggestions. Some people might be willing to do that for free. You can do a swap of some sort, or you can pay an expert to do it, and they will give you objective, here's what works, here's what doesn't work. So those are some of the things that I would check out. And also, like I said, there are a lot of content tweaks that you can do within your existing project, audio, video, that have marketing implications. And like I said, I wrote a blog post about that. I'll share it with you. But one of them is just building in within your show an opportunity to feature another collaborative, complementary partner that will do the same for you. Who can you shout out on each episode of the show? And maybe and you're essentially using that as inventory to leverage in collaborations with other people. So that's one content tweak. There's a lot you could be doing.
Yeah. Are there sort of growth tactics you're seeing a lot of podcasters try nowadays that you feel they're wasting their time, they're kind of useless nowadays?
Everything is useless if you are not willing to experiment. So go guest on a bunch of different shows, but don't do it once and then say that didn't work. It is a compounding effort. It takes a while, and it also takes a while to figure out your own story, your own messaging, how comfortable you feel being a guest on another show, and also how to talk about your thing without doing a hard sell for that thing. Really be valuable, and people will come to you.
Yeah.
Be valuable. But give valuable advice, information, things that you know that other people don't know, and people will come to you. So yeah, really doing anything without giving it the proper experimental time period. Doing the scientific, what is it called? The scientific method. You got to do that whole thing. You got to guess and check and iterate and come back to it and tweak and all that good stuff. When it comes to guesting, when it comes to being featured in newsletters, when it comes to buying ads in newsletters, buying ads on other podcasts, buying ads on things like Mopod and Audience Lift and Disco by Headliner and Introcast and all of these things. It's really an iterative process.
Yeah. Okay, so from where you sit as a curator and tastemaker in this industry, how do you feel podcasts are sort of shaping the way people understand the world and how, especially how they behave politically over the last decade or so?
To me, I just broaden that out, and I think anything that you come across on your computer at this point has an impact on how things are shaping the world. So I hesitate to answer just from a podcast perspective, just because podcast means so many different things. So Hot Ones, for example, the show that always goes viral, some people probably consider that a podcast because that's how they consume it, right? So I don't know. Everything is political at this point. Everything is a podcast at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but do you feel like there's been a real, I mean, all you have to do, I guess, is look at the sort of top 10, 20 podcasts in the US in the charts. And there's no hiding the fact that for a whole bunch of years now, there's been a lot of sort of right-wing podcast personalities that have grown their, to show massive shows, millions of listeners.
Yeah, but left-wing too in that top 10.
Left-wing too. Oh, for sure, especially of late. So, do you feel like podcasts have sort of an outsized impact because people have these people that they listen
factor.
to, right? The intimacy, the parasocial relationship. I feel like it's had a massive impact, and I think going forward, I think you're going to see a lot more sort of political maneuvering to use these mediums to influence how people think.
Yes, they're nowadays. I mean, I am probably going to work with somebody who's running for a position in a local government to get him on podcasts. That is the goal of my work with this guy. And it is for the purposes of reaching an audience that may or may not vote for him. So, yes, that is definitely a tactic that people are taking.
Yeah. And do you feel like podcasters, especially indie podcasters, have kind of a responsibility now that they maybe didn't before when speaking about politics or controversial topics?
I think they've always had this responsibility. I think if you are putting something out on the internet, it's your responsibility to not put out false information and to hopefully do your best to research if you're speaking about something that has factual implications. It's different if you're talking about opinions, but if you're giving statistics, please don't make things up. And ultimately just know that you are going to impact people because you're in their ears. And sometimes they might not be able to recall exactly who told them this thing, right?
Yeah.
I heard on a podcast, I can't remember which one. Pretty common thing to hear.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and again, it's like, well, okay, you heard it on a podcast, but did you do any fact checking after that?
Right.
Did you do any sort of due diligence, or are you just parroting what the podcaster said?
Right.
Okay, Arielle, final questions. What are your 3 podcasts that you'd recommend to anyone?
I used to try to get cute with this answer and ask you where you're from, and I'll give you a local recommendation, or what sports teams do you love? Let me give you a recommendation. But if you're completely new to listening, I would recommend a show that does storytelling really well, like 99% Invisible, or This American Life, or Planet Money. Shows that are human interest stories at heart, that give human interest stories underneath it all, even though they might be billed as a show about, in 99% Invisible's case, it's a show about design, but really it's a show about how the world comes together. And sometimes it's about tables and how they were designed, and sometimes it's about like the electoral system in the US and how that was built. So I think ultimately what I'm going for when I'm recommending a show to somebody completely new to listening is what's going to hook you. But I'm also going to say, please go for a walk while you're doing this, or do the dishes, or clean your house. Because if you're just sitting there and hoping to get hooked, it's a hard thing to do. It's really hard to be entertained through your ears if you're not also doing other things.
Do you listen to podcasts while you're working?
I can't.
No, eh?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I can do it, but not if I'm trying to write something. Then it's impossible. Yeah.
Yeah. Certain shows I can pick up most of it, and so I don't listen to the ones that I know that I must pay attention to while I'm doing other thing, while I'm working, but some of them I can.
Yeah. And final one, where can people find you online?
Search my name. You'll find me.
You'll find you, yeah. Awesome. Okay, Arielle, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
It has been wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity, and best of luck with this show. Congrats on the launch.
I appreciate it. Thanks. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talk That Pod. Make sure to follow us on all the social places. Just search for Talk That Pod. And if you're not subscribed yet, this podcast is also available on YouTube at Talk That Pod Show. Also, if you liked what you heard, tell your friends about it. And if you really liked it, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if you're a podcaster who wants to come on the show, go to talkthatpod.net and submit a request. Finding great podcasts is hard. That's why you should also check out Find That Pod. It's a podcast recommendation newsletter I write every week, bringing you 5 amazing new podcasts you should listen to. Subscribe today at findthatpod.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.